welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. Let's get started. So now that the first midterm is over, the first exam is over. Hey guys, let's get started. So now that the first exam is over, we're back to like our normal schedule of lectures and labs per week, and then assignments due on Friday. So the assignment that's due this Friday is assignment 6, airline tickets. This is more practice with lists actually. So you can get started on this right away if you haven't already. This is to give you some more practice with lists, airline tickets. This one's actually a pretty fun assignment, I think, because you're simulating like, so you can kind of take a look here, but you're simulating airline tickets. You're gonna assign seats. You're gonna print a seat map and print a boarding pass, so on and so forth. And lists are very useful for these kind of applications. So this is your assignment here, and on Piazza you can find the clinic notes on this assignment if you are struggling. You don't know where to start. There are some clinic notes here for assignment 6. It's like the very first one you see here, so you take a look at that. So do get started on that. So on Friday, it's more practice with lists like you've done before the exam, and you're gonna write some for loops and while loops. But the main core part of this assignment 6 is lists. Okay. Today we're going to talk about new topics. We're going to talk about functions actually for a while. We're going to talk about functions this week and next week as well. We're going to take functions a little slow. Functions are, I love functions. When I learned functions, I was like, oh, like this makes sense to me. So I hope that you feel the same way about this after today's lecture. So today we're going to embark on some new topics. We're going to talk about functions this week, functions next week. And then you're going to go on spring break, and when we come back, we'll do some other stuff. But for this week, we're going to talk about functions. Let's run through some sound pies. About function, constant function is here. And what they learn later is getting kind of like the key how one each benefit industry together and make our life to work. We can put variable functions simply to it. Get that to code use functions. We use functions using for the first like a recipe card you have again, right? So once it's declared, this is these steps to use like function, define a function. So the recipe we're gonna separate like what we like. Makes sense. Code in here. Create a main whatever you want to call that function. Like just print words with the print statement here. And that's the matter. Down the line, ready to actual example is, and then print that and then parentheses, and then we code piece right away. Call it. It's different. Just using name print. If I want to spam run code. Okay. Weather for here. Call again 2 pieces of function. Now show weather. And I call times as I want that. Code we call. So what happens? That's my function. What it's gonna do. Name function definition. However, there is a local variable in this function 1. Within this, and it only has a function 2. But that means I can't do something like this. 1 will get my brain. Then my function 1 will create a variable together. We're gonna have some rule when it comes to variable 1. I'll call these scope. Okay. There's an area comes with scope, common area. If you create a variable, it will price out, and the scoping issues they don't function. So watch out for the separate for everywhere. We'll talk about price sensible examples out. So please go and open up your PyCharm. Alright, let's go and open up PyCharm as usual, and let's just create some functions. I have my 115 open. I'm gonna open I'm gonna create a new file in my lectures. I'm just gonna call it, I think we're on lecture 12 now, like functions. Alright, there we go. And let's write some comments. Let me go ahead and make this bigger so you can see this better. Maybe a little bit bigger than this. 12 functions. Part 1, actually. We're going to be doing a lot more this Thursday and as well as next week. So actually, we have been creating and calling functions already, which I just haven't pointed it out to you. So hopefully this doesn't come to as a shocker. But we've been actually creating functions from the very beginning. That def main, what I just created is this is a function. Let's define a function named main. That's what we've been doing this all along, actually. I just didn't point it out to you because it wasn't relevant at that point. Okay, and when you're working with Python, this main function is used a lot because main is kind of the default, the first place Python kind of looks at, or it's not always, but it's a common convention. That's why we like to use main. And then actually, if you recall, we've been doing this before as well, right? We've been so if I put like print hello, like this was one of our first code that we ever wrote, print hello world, something like that. And again, that main parentheses, we've been doing this already. This is that line number 8. What it does is we call a function named main. Okay. So what we've been doing, we've been already creating functions and calling them, but we haven't talked about it yet. But here we are now. So what I've created is this. So this line 8 is actually what does all the magic. At the top here, line 4 and 5, all I've done is I have just created a print statement. I just defined it. But then line 8 here is what actually makes line 5 run. So if I didn't have line 8 right now, I'm going to comment this out. If I didn't have this, and I simply defined it, and if I ran this right now, I might get an error. Oh, I get nothing. Great. Okay, notice how nothing happens. I don't see hello world at all, right? Because I comment this out. So anytime you see DEF, again, we're defining it, just like how we're creating a variable for the first one. We're storing this piece of code into a function called main. But I'm not actually executing this function. This code doesn't actually get run. I have to have its counterpart, this line number 8 here. This 8 here, that little main and simple parentheses, this is what runs, what triggers the line 4 and 5 here. So this line 8 here, this calls my function or triggers that function. We have a lot of different names for it, but it means all the same thing. So this line 8 is actually very crucial. This is what actually executes my code here. And in my slides, I mentioned this order actually matters. I can't do this, for example. I can't, if I try to do something like this, if I try to call the function before it's created, it's gonna, I think I already have an error here, right? I have like a red little squiggly line already. It's gonna be like, name error, main is not defined. So the order matters. You want to always define. It makes sense, right? You got to define it's just like how we have to, a lot of times we have to declare our variables in the top and then use it later. Same idea, same rules. We got to define our function first and then run it, or else we're going to get this error like, main is not defined. So it's saying like, I don't know, line 4, right now line 4 is causing a problem. At line 4, main doesn't exist. It only exists, it gets created in line 7 here. So the order of this does matter. You always want to make sure you define your functions first, and then you call them, and then later on when you need to call them, you can call them. So let me put a little note here too. The order matters. Must define a function first before calling it. Very, very important here. Let's create another function. Let's do a very simple one. All I wanted to do is just say hello somebody, okay? So let's go back. I'm gonna define one up here. I'll just define it up here. Let's create another, or define, let's go ahead and define another function. And you can define as many functions you want. I'm gonna define my first one here. I'm simply gonna call it greet. By the way, the naming of my functions here, they follow similar rules as variables. Like you can still put like, greet 1, 2, 3. The capitalization matters. It's case sensitive. But typically we like to, in Python at least, the typical convention is when you're creating a function or defining a function, you use like lowercase letters. You use camel case, for example. So just keep that in mind. And we typically like to start with a lowercase letter. We don't like to do capital G, for example. Again, it won't like throw a big error or anything, but it's like a common convention, common naming convention that people use. So we're gonna declare it like that. All right, and then I'm simply gonna say print good afternoon. And let's just leave it like that. So I have created another function, and I'm simply saying good afternoon. Or why don't I do two? Okay, I just want to show you that we can do a lot of stuff in here. So I'm also going to do good evening as well. So this greet function, I've defined it so that it's going to print good afternoon and good evening. If I run this piece of code right now, I'll pull this up a little bit. Notice how it simply says hello world, right? We see hello world. But I don't see good afternoon or good evening. Right? I only see hello world. And the reason why I only see hello world is because I've called my main method down here, my main function down here, but I have not called my greet function. So again, this is how def is all, the only thing it's doing is I'm simply declaring a function, defining a function, I'm defining it. The code doesn't actually run until I call that function. So in my def main, right over here, after print hello world, all right, now I'm gonna go ahead and call the greet function. I can just call it in here, just like that, greet. If I do that, now I'm gonna see, and I run this. Now I will see hello world, good afternoon, and good evening. And the great thing about these functions is that, let's say if I copy paste this, or if I do this multiple times, how annoying, but if I greet 4 times, that code is gonna get run 4 times. Take a look at that. Hello world, good evening. Okay. Yeah.
Right now you've called greet inside main.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's totally fine, since we're gonna be doing since main will be called, and I'm calling some functions inside main.
We can even do it outside.
We could do outside as well. Yeah, I could have put this. I could have put this like after main, for example. Sorry, let me. Yeah, I could have done this as well. But just to keep our just to keep kind of our convention, we're gonna put it in main. Is that what we want? Right? We want, yeah. Just to not like confuse ourselves and go crazy here. Put everything in, just like you've done in all your other assignments. Put everything in your main. It will still it won't work. So we have main. We call main, and then we're gonna call greet. So I hope you can see a benefit of using a function here. One of the biggest benefits of using a function, or 2 really big benefits here of using functions, is the first is that first most obvious advantage of using a function is that now this piece of code is very clear. Like all this code, all it's doing is simply greeting. Like now I've kind of like organized, like grouped some functionality, and I stuck it in a function. It's very clear. That's what that function is doing. I didn't mix it with all my other code. The second huge advantage is once I've stored a function once, I can call it like I did here. I can call it as many times I want. I can call it like 6 times, 20 times. So anytime I need to reuse a piece of code, it's a good idea to just stick it in a function. So as maybe not for your assignment 6, you might not need to end up creating a function, but in future assignments or in any of your Python, wherever you use Python in the future, anytime you feel like, hey, I'm repeating this piece of code over and over again, I should just stick it in a function. That's what functions are great for. Any questions about that so far? Okay. Oh, and I want to also just emphasize, so I can, so this is my main. I have a lot of code in here right now. All right, this is my main function, right? I have print hello world. I'm calling greet like 4 times, and then I can still continue to write code here. Like I could still do my if-else statements where I'm just gonna do something bogus, like if like 5 is bigger than 6, just print like Yay, or something. All right, just something bogus. I can still do this. And 5, oh, let's do 5 is less than 6, not the other way around. All right, something bogus. If I do something like this, let's see how it runs. Okay, so we're gonna greet 1, 2, 3, 4 times. We're gonna print hello world at the top. So all this code is getting still read from top to bottom. We're saying print hello world. We're gonna greet like 4 times. 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're gonna keep continuing down my code here. If 5 is bigger than 6, all right, print yay. Okay, we printed yay. All right, so this is totally valid. Just because you create a function doesn't mean you automatically like go somewhere else. It's nothing like that at all. So when you call greet, what happens is this greet, when I call greet, it's gonna execute the lines 5 and 6 here. Okay, and then when it's done with that, it's gonna come back and it's gonna continue down the code. So we're still reading everything top to bottom, right? We're doing hello world, greet, and then we're still gonna continue down. So you can stick function, you can create functions, and you can call functions kind of in between wherever you'd like. So one more time, the flow of this is I print hello world, and then when I call greet, what happens behind the scenes is it's gonna look for that greet function over here. It's gonna run the greet function, line 5 and 6, and then once it's done with the greet function, it's gonna come back and continue the rest of the code. Right, so there's some behind the scenes, kind of jumps around a little bit, but eventually it does still execute your entire file here. Okay, any questions? Okay, all right, cool. Then what about let's talk about that variable stuff I mentioned, the whole scoping issue, and when I create variables, can I use it, blah, blah. So right now I'm in my main function. Let's say I'm gonna go ahead and create, let's say I'm going to just down, like over here after hello world. If I define it, let's go ahead and define a variable called and store the string Tommy in it, okay, or Tommy Trojan, let's say. Okay. We call this a local variable because we exist within this main function. Okay. So name exists only within the main function. So what I mean by that is, so right now everything's fine. Like I just declare name, right? So this is great. However, I can't access my name function up here. Back in my greet, let's say I want to print good evening and then print name here. Right away, there's a squiggly line. It's like, what the freak is name? It gives you the error right here. It says unresolved reference name. Okay. So even though I create a variable name over here, and it's by the way, it's vice versa. Even though I create a name over here, my function up here can't just can't simply access my name. Does that make sense? So whenever you're creating a variable, especially if it's in a function, it can only be used within that function. So that we call these like scoping rules, scoping namespacing, a lot of names for this, but ultimately when you create a variable, it only exists within the function it exists in. All right, let's comment this out. So I'll put a name. I'll put a comment in here. Can't you access name because it doesn't exist? Because and let's comment this out. Of course, if I had name in here, right, name Joe or something, then I can, then there's no more squiggly line. Of course, that would work, right? But this doesn't. So it will not work here. So we're going to comment that out, or else it's going to, by the way, if I run this, I'm going to get an error. Good. Okay. So these errors are pretty helpful. You can actually kind of, at the last line is usually helpful. It tells you, hey, name isn't defined. So you kind of are, that gives you a good idea of what went wrong. Any questions so far? Okay, so that's kind of functions for you in a nutshell. Let's do a little bit more, a deeper dive with functions. I'm going to go back to my slides. Let's do a little bit more here. All right, so we just talked about namespaces, how you can't, when you create a variable in a function, you can't use it outside that function. Let's talk a little bit more detail about functions. So what if I want to pass a variable, right? What if I, instead of in my good morning, in my good evening, my simple function here, what if I want to do a little bit more complex stuff, like make it a little more dynamic? What if I, instead of saying good afternoon, I want to say like good afternoon Tommy Trojan, or good afternoon Joe Smith, or John Doe, right? What if I do want to use variables, how, like, and make it a little bit more interesting? How can I do that? Luckily we can actually. So when we're working with functions, here's another thing that you can do with functions is you can actually input, kind of like this is the function here. We could actually input some specific arguments or specific parameters that we want to pass in. And then the function will run the code and it will spit something out. So function is all about input and output. So we call these parameters or argument, and they're the best way we provide some input to a function. So for example, we've actually been using a lot of functions already, but we just, again, haven't noticed it. For example, like rand range, when you guys use to generate random numbers, it asks for three, and the print function you print like over and over again to give to this Python word. But anytime you see like there's some inputs in more dynamic switch out any other parameters you want to have, comma like this. For how many parameters you want to function, if I want to name what's the variable that again, whatever we want in our code. We'll try this out as well. We're going to call the functions on the parameter 1, parameter 2, like that. What's down with this function? So I call my function, and what my code is going to do is there's variables. So I call this function, and I put hello variable, if you will, here, and it will, yeah, sure, yeah, parameter versus when you define the function, and then it could be hello, print what function calls. Let's say you want to, like, let's call functions, how you print, very simple example, just take a function and call. Let's try this out, and that might make a little more sense. So let's go back to our greet function. So I have greet, okay, this greet function. It's not doing anything special. It's simply printing out good morning or good afternoon. But I want to make this a little bit more dynamic, right? I want to say good afternoon. Let's do a plus sign here. Good afternoon, and then I want this to be more dynamic. Instead of saying simply good afternoon, I want the second value to be a little bit dynamic. I want to say like good afternoon name, for example. Okay. So let's take a look in my here, greet here. Okay. So what I want to do here is when I greet, I'm going to greet 1, 2, 3, 4 different times, but I want to greet different people. The first time I want to greet, the first time I call this function, I wanted to say good afternoon Tommy. The second time I want to say good afternoon Joe, or good afternoon, like I want this this name to be different every time I call these function. So this is when parameters are very useful. So if I do something like this, let's go ahead and do like this. In my greet, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to greet Tommy Trojan the first time. The second time I'm going to greet Joe Smith. And the third time I'm going to greet Tony Stark. You know, like making them. The fourth time I want to greet Chris Evans, right? First people that pop in my head, all right? Yeah, so let's say I want to greet these different people. What I'm doing here is I'm passing I'm going to pass this piece of information. I'm going to give this information to greet. So greet up here. Greet, all right? Greet up here is going to take that parameter. I can call it name, I can call it n, I can call it x, doesn't matter. Greet is going to now expect some kind of input from the function call. And now I can do something like this. Good afternoon, name. Let me go ahead and comment this out for now. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm waiting for one input, one piece of input to come in here. Name. Okay. Name. Okay. we're gonna call greet 1, 2, 3, 4 different times, but each time we're gonna have a different piece of string. We're gonna have a piece of different name going in. We're gonna ask for going into this function, and then the function is going to print out that name. So let's try this out. Oh, okay, I totally should format this better, probably like this, right? Okay. Okay, so let me run this one more time. There we go. Oh, man. Okay. Okay, so I've printed out, I've done greet 1, 2, 3. I've greeted 4 times, so I see 4 statements. 1, 2, 3, 4. But each time, so I'm making my function a little bit more dynamic, a little more reusable. I can reuse this function over and over again. So functions. So the earlier example we did, we saw a very simple version of a function, which is great. But I've made my function a little bit more reusable, a little bit more complex. So let's say I wanted to, for whatever reason, I wanted my program to say good afternoon 4 times, but for different people. This is a great use case for creating a function. So my function is going to handle the repetitive part here. Right? But every time I call this function, I'm going to give a little bit of different information. The first time I run greet, I'm going to greet Tommy Trojan. The second time I'm going to greet Joe Smith. Right? I'm still running the same function 1, 2, 3, 4 times, but every time I'm calling this function, I'm inputting another way we call this is passing. I'm inputting a little bit different information every time, but the output remains somewhat similar. I still see good afternoon, and then this whatever they gave me, I'm just putting it out here. Okay, so my function's a little more useful now. I'm taking a name, and I'm passing it. I'm showing it here. Does that make sense? Any questions about this? Yeah.
So that name variable for greet doesn't have any effect?
Nope, this has not, yeah. It only exists in the main, so by the time we even get here, name doesn't even exist. Yeah.
In this case, then, does order not matter?
Order of...
Because I was able to, like, put greet below main, and it's still getting the same.
Oh, yeah. The order, well, as long as the greet, you call greet after it's defined, where you call it, you can call it wherever you'd like. So you move this out here?
No, I moved, like, the entire top, like, def greet part. Yeah, that.
This?
I moved all that below.
Oh, you moved all this below?
Yeah.
Like below here?
No, above the main, and then below the main. Def main.
Oh, below the def main. You did it here.
I just switched the order of the definitions.
Like that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that should be fine because because I've declared define main up here, I've defined it here, and then I don't call main until 27, and then when I call 27, it's gonna go back up here, and by the time we go back up here, greet already exists. So yeah. So the order does matter, but it's because the greet got defined before main got called. Okay. Any questions about that? And I can pass in multiple arguments or multiple. I could give my function however many pieces of information I want. Maybe I also not only the name. Maybe I also want the age as well. Maybe I want to display my function like good afternoon, and then I want to print out name, and I could use this over and over again. Name is some. I want to get their age. I want to print out like their age, like years old or something. Like, so what I want to do in my program with my function is I want to print out the name as well as their age. And each person has a different age. Let's assume Tommy, Trojan, Joe Smith, all of these people have different age. So I can ask, whenever I'm calling a function, I can ask for however many arguments or parameters I want. So let's say, hey, you know that the second one that you give me, the second parameter you give me, age, I'm gonna expect an age as well. I'm gonna go down here, scroll. Now it's gonna, I'm gonna, using those commas, I'm gonna greet, the first thing it's gonna expect is a name, and second is Tommy Trojan. Tommy Trojan, I don't know, he's probably like 120 years old, right? Joe Smith, let's say he's like 22. Tony Stark, I don't know, 45. Also don't know, maybe 40, 38, I don't know. Picking random numbers, I have no idea actually. Yeah, so now, similar thing I did as earlier. I'm calling my greet function, but I can pass in two parameters, two pieces of information. And the great thing about functions is you can ask for however many inputs you'd like. So we're gonna just say, hey, for greet function, I want the name and the age. I want two pieces of information, and we use commas to determine that. Commas here, comma. Okay. So I'm passing when I call my greet function. We call this passing. I'm gonna pass in two pieces of information. I'm gonna give my greet function two pieces of information. The first one is name. The second one is age, and that order matters. So if I scroll back up here in my def here, notice it's name and then comma age. Right. So this order matters here. So it's gonna say. So now when we run this function, it's gonna say print good afternoon, name, and name is whatever name it was. It's gonna Tommy Trojan for the first time. We're gonna say name Tommy is, and then the age is the second parameter here, second thing here, second variable here. And these are all temporary, by the way. Again, these are all kind of temporary. These variables are whatever the variables that was given. So let's try this. Let's press run here. We're gonna see an error because I have integers going on in here and stuff. Let's change this to str. Quick. There you go. All right. So we're gonna see now. We're running this function. We're executing the code here over and over again. Good afternoon, Tommy Trojan. Tommy Trojan is 120 years old. Awesome. Okay, the second time I call it is good afternoon, Joe Smith. Now Joe Smith replaced the name here. String is, and then Joe Smith is 22 years old. Right, good afternoon, Tony Stark, blah, blah, so on and so forth. So these functions are kind of nice because not only, so that again, you can kind of see how when you want to do some reusable, when you want to reuse any piece of your code, but at times when things are slightly different every time. So let's say I'm writing a Python program that greets different people depending on their name. This is like a very good use case for that, using parameters. So parameters aren't always necessary, but these are not required, but they're very useful when you want to have slightly dynamic values, slightly different values every time you run a piece of code. Here's another example. To really understand functions, we just got to do some more examples. This is another function. Let's create another function. And what I want in this program, I'm going to keep it simple. I want this function to, let's do like display sum. Okay, I'm going to define another function that adds two numbers together. So what it's going to do and displays it. Okay. So it's going to ask for two pieces of information. We're going to need two pieces of information, right? We're going to need two params. Param 1 is going to be number 1. And then sometimes having these notes are very useful, number 2. and then we're gonna add these together. So we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna look for number one. We're gonna allow the user to give me like a first number and then a second number. Okay, and then we're gonna add these numbers together, and then we're gonna print this out. So maybe like num1 plus num2. That's all it's gonna do. But we're leaving these two numbers completely up to. We're gonna leave it completely dynamic. I'm not hard coding numbers in here. So I've created a function called display_sum, and it's looking for two. It's gonna wait for two numbers, expecting two numbers to come in. So when I call this function, I'm gonna pass in or input in two different numbers. And this function called display_sum is going to add these two numbers together. So that's all it's going to do. It's going to print it out. There's going to be a slight issue here. Like, of course, we got to worry about like adding strings versus adding numbers and all that. But for now, to keep things simple, let's just assume they're going to give us two like actual numbers, like integers or floats or doubles. They're not going to give me a string. Let's just assume that for now. Okay. All right, back in my main here. Back in my main here. Maybe make this a little bit smaller so we could fit a little bit more things in here. Let me hide this maybe. All right. Okay, so we have my display_sum here, right? You know what? I'm gonna do it. Okay, I'm gonna do it actually even before hello world, just so we can see this a little better. Okay, now if I do display_sum, I'm just gonna test this real quick. If I give them a 1 and a 2. It's going to display sum. I'm going to call my function display sum. It's going to take in these two numbers, number 1, comma, number 2, and it's going to add these commas, add these together, and it's going to simply print it out. Okay. Let's run this. Okay, way up here, 3. Okay, good. Okay, so these numbers can be whatever numbers. I'm going to do 5 comma 2, 5 comma 2. Then this function will now get, 5 plus 2. Okay, 5 plus 2 is going to be 7, hopefully. Oh, yeah, we get 5 plus 2, 7. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Can we take user?
We can take user input too. Yeah, let's take some user input. Let's ask the user for two numbers. All right. Let's say like input 1. Okay, we're gonna ask for two numbers from them. Input. Let's ask for give me first number. Okay, and input 2. Okay, so we're going to ask for two pieces of two numbers. Okay, and its input's going to give me a string though, so I need to convert this real quick. Right, so let me convert this real quick. Let's convert this. Okay, all right, so we're going to ask the user for give me two numbers, and we're going to whatever they give me, I'm going to then instead of hard coding 5 and 2, now I can say input 1, input 2, kind of like that. Does that make sense? So first we're asking the user for two numbers. We're going to give it to my display_sum function, just like that. Just boom, boom, boom. We're going to just put it, we're going to give them the input function. And we're going to simply print out number 1 plus number 2. Now this is a lot more dynamic. Right now, instead of hard coding in numbers, or we can say first number, second number, whatever the user gives us, we're going to add them together. We're going to do it here. So an earlier question was like, why do we need to do this? Can't I just print it here, right? Yeah, right. So previously we've just done all of our we put everything in the main previously, but now let's get into practice of creating functions and letting functions do specific pieces of code. So my main method is simply going to ask for some user input. And then I'm just going to create a function that takes care of my my display sum here. So let's throw that in here, this place. Okay. To add the two numbers that user gave, right? All right, let's run this. Okay, first number is gonna be, let's just say like 14. Second number is gonna be 5, and hopefully, oh, we get 19. There we go. Any questions about this? Anyone's code not working and you like wanted to get to work? Yeah.
Let's say you wanted to use the input function and display sum, but you wanted to put display sum outside of main, like at the end. Remember?
Say that one more time. You want to put display sum.
Like if you go all the way to the bottom, where you like end main. You wanted to just print the function like as a different function. Completely.
Yeah, you could totally you can you mean like can you move this like here?
Yeah.
For example.
It would accept input.
Oh, you would also need to move input as well, because input is defined in my main.
Okay.
So if I put it outside the main, I have to like put everything. Like I have to move that out here as well.
Would you be able to put it in display sum?
Oh, would you be able to put in display sum? Yeah, you could put in display sum too. Yeah. The input, just the two inputs. Yep. Yeah. But it's a good idea to just stick everything in main. And if you need to make different function calls, you could do it like in here. Just like how we can do greet in here, you can do everything in here. So yeah. Yeah, so you could totally do the input in the display sum as well. Yeah. Any questions? Okay. I could make this function even more robust. What if I wanted to create like a very basic calculator, like add two numbers together, multiply two numbers together, divide, right? Like what if I want it to be a little bit more dynamic? Functions, again, are really great for that kind of stuff. What I could do then is, instead of saying only display sum, let's change this a little bit. I'm gonna change my function a little bit. I'm gonna call it do math. Okay, and I'm gonna ask for two numbers, number 1, number 2. We'll keep it simple, and I'm gonna ask for a third parameter, a third argument, and this is gonna be my operator. Okay, so if depending on what the user wants to do, if the user wants me to add, subtract, multiply, or divide, depending on what they want me to do, I'm gonna do that math. So I'm gonna ask for a third input. So it's gonna say first input, second input. Let's ask for number 3, input number 3. This one will be a string. And I'm going to ask for what operator. And let's give them some choices just to keep our life a little bit easier. Plus, like minus, multiply, divide. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to give us third argument, giving it 3 pieces of information. Oh, yeah, display sum doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to do math. I'm calling it do math now. Okay, do math. There we go. There's do math. I've changed it up a little bit. Okay. All right, so depending on what the user gives me, they're going to be first number, second number, and third number. And they're also going to tell me what operator. Okay, 3 pieces of information separated by commas. And then now in my do math function, now I can do a little bit more coding here. So, okay, depending on what that third one is, I need to change this a little bit, right? So in here, I can do a if-else statement. I can say if operator equals plus, for example, we're going to print number 1 plus number 2. Makes sense? Okay. Elif, okay, operator equals minus, we're going to num1 minus num2. All right, that makes sense, right? So this operator, the third, using these pieces of information that the user gave me, I can write some more code in my function here. Okay, let's keep doing this. Operator equals, is it asterisk? Okay, asterisk. Okay, oops, print. Okay, we're going to print num1 times num2. Okay, else, like, I don't know, else, this, I don't know, else, we just gotta print an error. Something went wrong. Because technically we could only add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So if they gave me anything else, something went wrong. So this is now a little more robust. This is a more typical case of a function. A function usually does a lot of things on its own. It's going to do math for us. Okay, we're going to ask for 3 pieces of information, number 1, number 2, and an operator. And depending on what operator they gave me, I'm going to do the math. This is a very classic example of a function. So this is probably a lot more, functions typically have a little more information like this. All right, let's go back down here. So do math. All right, we're going to ask for 3 pieces of information. Okay, and then depending on what they gave me, we're going to do the math. Did I do all this right? Let's see. Okay. We're going to have to handle, I'm kind of like us, again, there's probably some error handling we need to do, but I'm not going to do it. Like, what if they try to divide, like 1 divided by 0 or something, right? I actually don't know what error we're going to get from Python, but, right? So we're just going to assume they're giving me real numbers and that calculation is going to work. So let's go ahead and try this out. All right, first number, let's do like 5. Second number, 5. What operator? I'm going to do multiplication. Hopefully we get 25. There we go, 25. And I can keep running this, like I can do, right, first number, 2, second number 2, we're going to divide, hopefully we get, 1.0, okay, because we're dividing, right. Okay. Okay, and I can run this again, like first number, like I'm just going to test some stuff, 10, 14 plus, okay, we get 24. Then I'm going to try like a weird one, like 1, 2, and then blah, blah, blah. Something went wrong. Good. Okay, so today I'm just kind of showing you what functions can do. And as you can see, functions functions are great for when you want to reuse a lot of code, and functions make things a lot cleaner, as you can see. So I kind of separated the code that does my arithmetic for me. I put it out in I separate that code and I put it into do math, and the main only does like the ask for user input. So I'm kind of like, again, chunking my code out. So that's like a huge benefit of using functions. And you can pass in some inputs, and the functions can do whatever. Yeah, I have a question?
Will it still work if you put the inputs under do math?
Yeah. You can still do it in here, but then it gets a little odd if you move the inputs like in here. You mean like in here, right? You totally can. But then it's a little interesting now. Then I don't really need these 3 pieces anymore, because do math is gonna do it for me. So I would get rid of these 3 pieces. Like I wouldn't need this anymore. And I will need to change my variables here because now I'm doing it in here. Yeah, so it's just a little different.
So what's the point of putting it under?
You could do where it's totally up to. It's kind of up to you. I guess you could do it there. If you only wanted to ask the input once, like main is an okay place to put it. But if you do want to ask for input multiple times, maybe it is a good idea to put it in do math. Or another thing people could do is you could have another function that all it does is asks for input, and then that function calls do math, and do math just does the math operation. That's like another thing you could do as well. So functions, it's sometimes it could be a little subjective. It kind of depends. It's up to you. This is where like some of the creativity happens, right? Like it's kind of there aren't like set like defined rules saying you have to put inputs in a function or you cannot put inputs in a function, right? I mean, in the assignment 7 guidelines, there might be some rules you have to follow, but in Python in general, how to create functions is kind of up to you. The general rule of thumb is anytime you're going to reuse code, you want to create a function for it. Yeah.
Can you just go down a little?
More?
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
Could you put the inputs into the do math, like inside the parentheses?
Oh, like all this stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like instead of doing input 1 like this, yeah. Like just put this like this.
But it's better to like have separate variables for it.
No, I like it like this just because it's a lot cleaner to read, but it doesn't, like, it's the same thing. Yeah. Oops. Any other questions? Alrighty, we'll do some more with functions on Thursday. We'll try the lab and get more practice on Thursday. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. I will see you on Thursday.